Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to today's session on heritage walks in Delhi with Swapna Liddle. Swapna is an author and historian with a deep love for the history and culture of the city of Delhi, and in particular, Shaajanabad. She has written many books that aim to raise awareness about the city's historic neighborhoods and buildings. She's the author of books including Connaught Place and the Making of New Delhi, Chandni Chowk, the Mughal city of Old Delhi, and Delhi, 14 historic walks, along with several articles for academic journals and books. Swapna is also closely involved in the movement to preserve heritage monuments and sites, and is the convener of the Delhi chapter of the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, INTAC. When we talk about Delhi, Delhi is a happy amalgamation of the ancient, medieval, and modern, and has a flavor that is unparalleled by any other region. The historic sites of Delhi are best appreciated through intimate and leisurely walking explorations. Today, Swapna will reveal some of those secrets that can only be seen by going off the beaten path with an expert and a great storyteller like herself. Welcome, Swapna, and I'm going to pass on the mic now to you so that you can show us Delhi through your eyes.
Thank you so much, Deshri, and for having me over to speak about. I never need an excuse to talk about a subject which I love so much, which is Delhi, and its hidden gems, which are there in every corner. Really, you go to so many different places, and you see so much of history in Delhi. So, to begin with, I'd like to say a little bit about how my journey really began, because I'm a history student and I've loved history for a very long time. From the last few years of school, I was really in love with history, and I decided to study it as in my higher education also. And I did my BA, and I did too many degrees actually. I think I did my BA and MA and MPhil and PhD and whatnot. But more and more my interest in Delhi grew. So I did a PhD in Delhi, on 19th century Delhi finally. But at the same time, while I was doing research on Delhi, when I was studying Delhi from an academic point of view, I had also begun to, and this was from the time I was in college in BA and MA, I had started to explore historic sites in Delhi. Some beginning with the very obvious ones like Red Fort and Purana Killa and Qutub Minar, etc. And by the way, I must mention the fact that today, the condition in which we see some of these sites, like Purana Killa, for instance, is a much improved situation from what it was 20 years ago when I started exploring these, because it was, that's more than 20 years. I mean, I'm talking about 30 years ago that I first used to start going to these places, and they used to be overrun with monkeys and jungle. It was an absolute wilderness there. So things have improved a lot. But anyhow, I started exploring these, discovering a little bit more about them. And then it was a little over 20 years ago that I attended my first heritage walk. And I'd say a heritage walk in many senses is very different from a regular sort of tourist's view, because this was a heritage walk which was done by a small group of enthusiasts who were residents of the city, who were discovering the city for themselves. And they led this heritage walk. And it was through this experience of actually being on a couple of heritage walks that I got drawn into a walks program which was being started by the India Habitat Center. And this was completely non-commercial. This was again a small group of enthusiasts. We used to, every other weekend or so, I think two weekends in a month, we used to go out. And it was the same 10, 12 people, 15 people at most who used to come for these walks. And one of us used to do the walk. So it was very much, we didn't want it to be a closed group, but effectively it was a closed group because there weren't too many people attending. And from more than 20 years ago, when these kind of beginnings, and I won't say I was one of the first, because there were other walks happening before that, but from that beginning, really slowly the walks movement started taking off in Delhi. So that's where I am coming from, exploring the city, as an academic, from my academic reading and writing, and then as an enthusiast, I became then involved in, after I had joined the walks movement, that I got involved in INTAC also, and then I became interested in the need not only to explore the city and its historic sites, but also work to try and save them, because some of them are in danger, and I will talk about some of that in the talk that I talk about, because apart from monuments, there are many other historic sites which need to be preserved. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, because I always feel that it's interesting if during a talk you can see some pictures as well. So I'm going to share some pictures. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and show you a few pictures as I go along. So my first slide is this book that had come up. This is the first book I wrote, in fact, was Delhi 14 Historic Walks. It was published in 2011, and a new edition of it is going to come out sometime soon, hopefully. So this is where it was a culmination of one phase of my journey, which was as a walk leader. We call them walk leaders. We have a lot of walk leaders, most of them, and in INTAC, whether it's INTAC or in Habitat Center, we are people who have other day jobs. There are people who do all sorts of things, but on their weekends, they are enthusiasts, they volunteer to do walks. So INTAC, all our walk leaders are volunteers who give their weekends for this kind of thing. So this was the first book, but I will go on and talk about the walks. So there are many favorite parts in Delhi, many of my favorite sites, but I'm going to talk about basically just a few areas, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to, just give me a moment while there are many. One of my favorite places actually is this place called the Meroli Archaeological Park. And Meroli Archaeological Park is in right next to the Qutub Minar. I'm sorry, I'm not being able to move this for some reason. Just give me a moment, I'll be with you.
Sure, Swapna.
Sometimes I don't know what happens.
No, I think we've all had this glitch some or the other time. Yeah.
I will. Okay, this is the way to do it then, if it doesn't move. So this is Meroli Archaeological Park. I hope you can see my screen now, the next slide in it. And Meroli Archaeological Park is a very underestimated place, I think. It's right next to the Qutub Minar. And the reason I'm talking about this now, and because the average tourist, and this is about people who live in Delhi also, they might go to Qutub Minar, but very few will venture beyond it to see what is beyond it. And what is beyond it is this absolutely fabulous space called the Meroli Archaeological Park. And of course, a lot of people know it better as Jamali Kamali. It has some very interesting monuments. I will talk about just a few of them, just to show you how complex this place is. So this is a little chhatri which is there, and you can see the Minar beyond it, of course. One thing I like about Meroli Archaeological Park is that it is just so green. It is extremely green. It's so, even on a summer's day, if you're stuck for where to go, because it is hot and humid, and you feel that outdoors is not probably the best kind of outing, I would still recommend go to Meroli Archaeological Park, because it has so many trees, it has so much greenery that you will still be quite comfortable stepping out. So it's a place that can be visited today as well. So it's not uncomfortable at all. This is a beautiful little doorway which leads into an enclosure which has many, a tomb known as Khan Shahid's tomb, etc. So these are just impressions. I won't talk about the monuments so much. Some of them I will, but just to give you an impression of what Meroli Archaeological Park is like, how beautiful it is to go for a walk here and see the lovely greenery, but also see some absolute gems of architecture. It is a very historically very, very significant park because it has some landmark monuments. One of them, as you see in this image, is the Tomb of Balban. Balban, of course, all of us who've studied Indian history in school will realize Balban was one of the rulers of the so-called slave sultans, one of the slave sultans. And this is his tomb, which you can see beyond, from the gateway beyond, you can see his tomb. This gateway is, of course, it was built, the tomb was built around in the 1280s, so it's quite old. You can see the architecture is a very mixed kind of architecture, the old traditional Indian styles, coupled with some modern at that time, which was new innovations that were taking place. And that new innovation is really evident in this particular tomb, because this slide, which you see, shows the very, very first examples of a true arch being made in Delhi. So you can see this, the tomb itself is in a very ruined condition. So this is you can see in the middle, there's an arch. So the arch is still intact and quite, so this is really the first arch that we see in Delhi. So as a historical moment, this is very important. And in the Meroli Archaeological Park, what is amazing about it is that you see structures which date really even from the middle of the 11th century, which is the wall of the first fortified city of Delhi, which was Lal Kot. So from the Lal Kot walls, you can see some ruins of the Lal Kot fort. And right down to the 19th century, you will see many, many buildings in this one park. And there are some beautiful examples. As I said, I'm not going to be able to go into each one of them. I'm just showing you a few important buildings there. The other one, of course, is Delhi's, according to me, Delhi's most impressive Bauli, stepwell. This is a stepwell. It's called the Rajon ki Bauli. Rajon ki Bauli, Raj as in the masons, Raj Mistri, masons. So masons, at some point, maybe masons started using this, or a community of masons might have been located over here. We are not very sure where the name comes from, but it dates from the early 16th century. And it's quite a beautiful Bauli. It goes down 4 or 5 levels, 5 levels actually. Part of it is not shown over here, but it does not have very clean water. That's the problem with a lot of water bodies in Delhi, because we have allowed our groundwater to be depleted, to be polluted. So therefore, a lot of these traditional water systems which used to work so beautifully don't work anymore. They either are dry or have dirty water in them. And that's a problem here as well. But it's a beautiful structure, a beautiful monument. It's preserved by the Archaeological Survey of India. It's well worth a visit when you come to Meroli Archaeological Park. As I said, that there are structures from all different eras. So the Balban's tomb is from the 13th century, Rajon ki Bauli is from the 16th century, and then later from the early 17th century, you have this is the tomb which is known as, which was later called Dilkusha. It is the tomb of the brother of Adham Khan. Adham Khan, I'd like to remind you, Adham Khan was the so-called foster brother of Akbar, of the Emperor Akbar. Akbar, as was common among the Mughal emperors and their children, that the newborn babies, to feed them, to nurse them, the wives of important noblemen used to be assigned. And it was a privilege for the nobleman to have his wife assigned, and for that woman, for his wife to be assigned and to have the privilege of breastfeeding the emperor's children. So one of the foster mothers of Akbar was Mahamanga. And Mahamanga, two of her sons are known in history. One of them was Adham Khan and one of them was this Kuli Khan. Adham Khan, of course, is better known because Adham Khan was the man who, when Akbar was a young man, Adham Khan had become very powerful, and he was not a very nice guy. He tried to assassinate another nobleman at Akbar's court, and Akbar had him killed by being thrown off the ramparts of the Agra fort. In fact, I often tell people, when I take children out for these walks, I often tell them, have you seen the movie Jodha Akbar? Then you might remember who Adham Khan is, even if you don't remember your history books at all. So Adham Khan, his brother was Kuli Khan. Adham Khan, of course, died young, but Kuli Khan lived longer. He died in the early 17th century. He's buried over here. So this is Kuli Khan's tomb. But the reason I'm showing you this is because it's a very interesting monument. Now, if you can see it, it's a tomb which is 8-sided. It has 8-sided, but can you see that little projection on one side? What is that projection? That projection is the remnant of certain additions that had been made to this in the 19th century. And the next picture I'm going to show you show the kind of additions that had been made to it. It's a very, very interesting and a kind of weird story, because in the 19th century, in the 1840s, this tomb was made into a house, and rooms were added around the main tomb chamber. If you can see in this picture, you can see the dome, you can see the main building, which looks kind of grayish, but around it, as you can see, rooms have been added. Several rooms have been added to make it into a big house. Now, this house was the house of Thomas Metcalfe. Thomas Metcalfe was the chief commissioner of Delhi. The commissioner of Delhi at that point was the highest British official in Delhi. The British, at that point, the British East India Company was actually ruling Delhi. And though they used to all live in what we today call Old Delhi, Shaajanabad, they used to come here often for weekends. And Thomas Metcalfe bought this tomb. He bought this tomb from its owners and converted it into a house, built all these rooms around it, made this beautiful garden, and he had this wonderful view of the Qutub Minar also. But I think it's kind of weird. It's a wonderful story, but really weird, because the main tomb chamber, which was above the actual grave of Kuli Khan, that used to be their dining room, and they lived in it as any other house. So it's a fabulous story. So it's lovely to go and see these places and to see these it's off the beaten track. It's in the sense that even though so many people come to Qutub Minar, they'll never go into Meroli Archaeological Park. They find it difficult to find their way. A good way to explore it is by going on a heritage walk like this. There are other weird and wonderful things in Meroli Archaeological Park, or just at the edge of it. This one is just at the edge of it, right? You can actually easily see these from the Qutub Minar as well. This is a pyramid, as you can see. This one and the next one, you can see these very pyramid. One is a circular kind of pyramid, one is a typical square plan kind of pyramid. And these are structures which were also built in the 19th century by Thomas Metcalfe in the 1840s. The idea behind why did he build pyramids in this area? As I said, he used to live in this place. He had his house here. He used to come here for weekend trips. And it was a tradition among the British, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries in Britain itself, that in their own estates, in their home estates, they would have some either mock ruins or mock exotic buildings. So pyramids, Egypt was a big tourist destination even then, and a lot of British used to go there. So they tried to replicate things like pyramids also, and Thomas Metcalfe decided to build a couple of pyramids in Meroli. And his daughter's memoirs have survived, and his daughter actually tells us that, you can see the steps of the pyramids. The steps of the pyramids at night, when they used to be staying in Meroli overnight, they used to get people to put diyas, little lamps, on the steps. So from a distance, you could see the whole thing all beautifully lit up. You must also remember that today, when we see so much greenery in that area, it was actually at that point quite treeless. There were relatively fewer trees, though there probably were bigger trees, but there were fewer trees, and therefore, from a distance, you would have been able to see many of these monuments, which these days you sometimes miss simply because there are so many trees around. So this is actually Meroli Archaeological Park, a very, very interesting place. And I think from the tourist point of view, if somebody who is visiting from outside also can easily spend a whole day in the Meroli area. You start off with the Qutub Minar, but you can and should in fact explore not only Meroli Archaeological Park, but the Meroli village, which also is a fascinating place because it has a lot of not only monuments, but of course things like restaurants and other things which you can really enjoy. So Meroli should be, for a tourist, should be a one-day destination in itself in Delhi. You should budget one day just to visit the Meroli area. But as I said, my time is limited, so I'm going to go on to my next destination in Delhi, which is Shaajanabad. And Shaajanabad, of course, is old Delhi, which is much more, I think, on the average tourist map. And if you look at the people of Delhi, if you ask the people of Delhi, you will know that a lot of them also are much more familiar with Shaajanabad. But what do we see of Shaajanabad normally? Now, if you look at the average Delhi person, they will go there either to shop or to eat. And I'll come to that, why that is important as well. And it is amazing, but there is a lot more to see. And often we who live in the city often miss those important sites. Tourists, of course, are very familiar with it, will definitely go and visit Red Fort. And some of them, many of them, in fact, if you are at all interested in the old city, you will come and spend a little bit of time in Shaajanabad as well. One way in which Shaajanabad is usually experienced is through its landmarks. And I don't need to really talk a lot about the landmarks. I will touch on some of them. One of them is the Jain Mandir. The Jain Mandir is a historic mandir. This is called the Digambar Jain Lal Mandir. It's one of, though the buildings are relatively new, it's an old mandir which dates from Shah Jahan's time. Now, unlike what a lot of people believe, Shaajanabad, which Shah Jahan founded, is not one of those, some historians have called it an Islamic city. I don't agree with them. It's not an Islamic city. It is a Mughal city. And the Mughal ethos was about coexistence of different communities. And you will see it as soon as you go down that Chandni Chowk road, not only the Jain Mandir, but you'll see many other places of worship. But the Jain Mandir definitely is one of the most important. It dates from Shah Jahan's time, and he actually gave the Jain merchants prime land right in front of the Red Fort to build a whole locality for themselves. And that was what we today call Dariba, the locality of Dariba. The Jain merchants and bankers established their businesses in Dariba. And of course, where the Jains went, their temples also were made in the same place. So therefore, not only the Digambar Jain Mandir, this is of course the best known of them, but the whole area of Dariba and its neighboring part, which is called Dharampura, has a number of Jain mandirs, and that is really one of its highlights. But as I said, if you're talking about experiencing the city through landmarks, these are the kind of landmarks that a typical tourist would be taken through. The Java Masjid, of course, the Mughal emperor himself had this constructed. Shah Jahan had the Java Masjid constructed. His wives had some mosques also, they commissioned some mosques, but this was the Mughal emperor's own mosque. He commissioned it, he appointed the imam, he appointed the functionaries of this mosque. So this was a very, very important building. As I said, I'm not going into the details of these buildings. I'm talking about how a tourist might experience them. This is a must do, of course. So this is a no-brainer. Everybody goes to the Java Masjid. People might at least pass by the Jain Mandir if they don't go inside. Many of them do go inside. So important landmarks. Another important landmark is the Sunnahiri Masjid. Sunnahiri Masjid is important for its historical significance. It's not a very big mosque. It was built in the first quarter of the 18th century by one nobleman called Zafar Khan. But it is actually associated with a rather gory part of Delhi's history, which was the invasion of Nadir Shah in 1739. And when Nadir Shah invaded, and the Mughal emperor was at that time Muhammad Shah Rangila, who made a lot of contributions in the field of the arts, but did not have that much success militarily. And his armies were defeated in Karnal by the armies of Nadir Shah. And Nadir Shah then came to Delhi, where he was actually acknowledged as the ruler of Delhi. Coins were minted in his name, and Muhammad Shah actually offered him his own crown. Now, while all this was happening in the Red Fort, Muhammad Shah's soldiers, they were exploring Delhi, as we often do these days. So they were exploring, they must have been doing some shopping, looking at the place. They were off duty because the war, of course, was over. They were experiencing the city, exploring the city. And while they were doing that, some of the Delhi people attacked them. Now, the Delhi people have always been known for their very volatile nature. They are free spirits and they are independent, and these days I think one would say dabang. And there were some people who attacked them. People said that it was also a couple of days before Holi. This was in March, and this was a few days before Holi, so a lot of people might have been intoxicated also. So they attacked these soldiers, and when Nadir Shah heard that his soldiers had been attacked, he exacted a huge revenge on the people of Delhi. He ordered a massacre of the citizens in the localities where these attacks had taken place, and some 20,000 or so people were killed. So that was a disaster for Delhi. And it is said that it was on the steps of this mosque that Nadir Shah sat himself and supervised that massacre. So a very, very gory history, but one of the landmarks of a landmark walk. If you are doing just one exploration of the city, then this is one of the landmarks that is naturally shown to you. So these are important landmarks. But beyond that, I would say, and again, as somebody who's led many historic walks, and as a member of INTAC, where we lead, other members also lead walks, one of our popular focus has been the architecture of Old Delhi, which a lot of people don't realize. There is a lot of great historic architecture in Old Delhi. It's not just about landmarks and historic places. We have listed heritage buildings. There are some 700 plus listed heritage buildings in Shaajanabad, and some of the areas are very well have a lot of them. So particularly if you go to places like Dharampura, if you go to Kinari Bazaar, if you go to Chudiwala, you will see some amazing examples of architecture. This is in a lane called Kuchapatiram, just off Kinari Bazaar. You can see beautifully carved doorways. I'm going to give you just a few examples. Now, what has happened is that Shaajanabad has had a long evolution. Shaajanabad has evolved over the centuries. It's not as if it was built by Shah Jahan and then it froze. No, even in Shah Jahan's time, most of the construction was done by the people themselves, who built their own houses, they built their own bazaars, etc. So you had people building their own structures. So you have Havelis that they built. This is a very typical Mughal style Haveli with the scalloped arch, a rather plain facade, not very elaborately carved. This is a very, very typical Shahjahani period arch, shall we say. So a lot of what you see when you go on these Haveli walks, you can't walk into the most of the Havelis because they are occupied, but you can see the outside, and the facades are really the most beautiful part of many of these Havelis. This is a much more ornate building. This is from the 19th century, and this is a temple. This is one of the many Jain temples in Dharampura. And look at the elaborately carved sandstone doorway. So though the Mughal style continued, but it evolved a little bit in becoming more ornate, much more decorative techniques being used. But again, it did not stop there. It keeps evolving. And you see, it evolved with the coming of British architecture. You started having initially some things like Gothic doorways, Roman arches, round arches, pointed arches of a Gothic style, but also remarkably new styles like this Gothic doorway. Look at this. This, sorry, not a Gothic, this is Art Deco. This is an Art Deco style. People talk about Art Deco Mumbai, and of course, yes, most important buildings of the Art Deco style are there in Bombay. But Delhi also was influenced by the Art Deco movement, and particularly in the Havelis in Shaajanabad, you can see these kind of experiments that were taking place in that in Shaajanabad too. So therefore, an architectural walk is really not only for specialist interest, but we find that a lot of people who are otherwise generally interested in architecture and history would be interested in seeing this kind of array of different architectural styles during a walk. This is a photograph of myself, I think taken about 15 years ago on a walk in Kinari Bazaar. So that is one other aspect of Delhi which should not be missed, of Shaajanabad which should not be missed, the shopping and the food. Shopping, this is Kinari Bazaar. Kinari Bazaar is one of the many specialist bazaars of Shaajanabad. You can, and it's been like this from a very long time. You have 200-year-old sources also which talk about this place, Gota, Kinari, these kind of things, fabrics were being sold in Kinari Bazaar even more than 200 years ago. So it's really a living heritage, shall we say. This is again in that area, I think one of the adjoining lanes, lovely bangles. It's a shopper's paradise, Shaajanabad, there's no doubt about it. And specialist shopping walks are also happening now particularly they are good for smaller groups who don't mind going into one shop and spending a lot of time there. So they have to be like-minded people, and there are personalized shoppers who can take you through these. So that's a wonderful way of exploring the city of Shaajanabad. This is another one of the specialist bazaars, Khari Bauli. Khari Bauli, originally named after a brackish well that used to be in this area, but now known more for its spice market and for its dry fruits market. It's a fabulous place, and I think Asia's largest spice market, which is quite something, and definitely worth seeing. Another way of exploring and of course the food. And food is there, of course, 24/7, and particularly during Ramzan, there are many specialist walks, but any time of the day or year and day, a food walk in Shaajanabad is very, very justified. And the range of food is amazing. It's not many, many different kinds of food, street food, other food, non-vegetarian, vegetarian, all different kinds of cuisines. And because Shaajanabad was and is such a cosmopolitan place, there are people of many different ethnicities, many different backgrounds, food cultures. So you see a huge variety of food in Shaajanabad as well, and they can all be explored through heritage walks, and many food walks do take place. Finally, I come to another way of exploring Shaajanabad and its surroundings, which is special themed walks. And one walk which I find that a lot of people are interested in is the revolt of 1857. 1857, of course, is a major landmark in Delhi's history. It was, sometimes it's called the first war of independence, but of course the struggle for independence against the British had begun earlier also. But anyhow, this was probably the first really big widespread movement. So the landmarks of 1857, this is Kashmiri Gate. This was where the British, when they recaptured the city after the revolt, they broke down the gates of this, the leaves of this gate, and then they captured the city. So Kashmiri Gate is, of course, one of the landmarks. The other is the magazine. These are the gateways of the magazine. The British who were holding, the magazine was where the ammunition used to be stored by the British. So when the revolt broke out, they realized that if the Indian soldiers got hold of these of this ammunition, they would have an upper hand. So they decided to blow it up. So they set fire to the magazine and it blew up. And all that was left were the gates. So this is one of the two gates of the magazine, which still stands. So the 1857 walk actually takes in an area which is quite large, because it starts from the northern end of Shaajanabad, the Kashmiri Gate area, and it goes further into the ridge as well. The ridge, of course, is the sort of slightly hilly area of civil lines, and beyond it into north of Shaajanabad. And as you go in, you start going, you see Nicholson Cemetery. Nicholson Cemetery is again a very interesting place, because it was first, this cemetery was set up for the burial of those who had died in the revolt of 1857. So many soldiers and others, it gets its name from John Nicholson, who was responsible for the British recapture of Delhi. He was one of the people responsible. So he was buried here. A lot of others are buried here, not only soldiers, but after that, many others, including Indians, were also buried in the Nicholson Cemetery. So you can, it's a interesting place. In fact, Intact has done a documentation recently of it, of cleaning up also, and has done a little bit of restoration on some of the graves. So it is a place that is now turning into a more ordered place, where definitely going to be an important tourist site in Delhi. Finally, one of the monuments of 1857 is the so-called Mutiny Memorial, though it has now been rechristened Ajitgarh, and it's a lovely red sandstone Gothic style tower that you can see in this picture over here. Towering place. It's at a height which is not immediately obvious in this photograph, because again, what has happened is this area has become absolutely covered and surrounded by trees, so you can't often get a satisfactory photograph of it from a distance. So the best photographs are from a close up, but it's on the ridge right down from Hindu Rao Hospital. And on that road, there are several other monuments also which are related to the history of the revolt in 1857. So a beautiful walk and the story of the revolt can be told through these. In fact, it probably will take 2 walks to cover all the sites, one inside Kashmiri Gate and one outside Kashmiri Gate on the ridge. So many different ways of exploring the same city through different themes, through different focuses like food and shopping and landmarks and architecture. So a very, very brief look at some of the highlights and a very, very subjective pick of some of the things that I thought that people who are interested in Delhi's, in exploring Delhi might like to look at through historic walks. But I would be very happy to have any questions that you might have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go into and get back to you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Swapna. This has been such an informative session and it's such wonderful storytelling. You've really, got us glued to the screens for the duration that you've been with us. It's given us some great insight into the areas of Meroli and Old Delhi, Shaajanabad. Really extraordinary, some of the stuff, especially the pyramids. You would never think of finding things like these anywhere, and bam, right in the middle of a place that you've always known. There's some great hidden gems in Delhi, and thank you so much for introducing us to them. We're now open for question and answers, but before I go to that, I have one question for you. You've been doing walks for almost 20 years now. How do you think the field has changed? Like, how has it been? How has the evolution been?
I think what is good is that when we started off, we were we were amateurs, right? We were amateurs. Some of us were just enthusiasts, as you would call them. And of course, some of us are still in that space because I myself am an activist. Intact's main aim is to raise awareness about heritage sites. But what I think is good is that it is becoming more commercial also. Because I think tourism should be taken as a commercial activity, and heritage walks should be part of that activity as well. And I think that's very important because that's the way sustainability comes in. Because you can't have sustainable development based on activism alone, right? It has to be commercially viable. So I'm glad to see that people are making careers out of heritage walks. So I think that's what is happening, and I am really, really glad that it's happening. And more people, there is space for a lot of people. There's space for a lot of people to do this. So I'm really happy about that.
Great. So I'll take the first question that has come to us, and this is from Fairaj Khan. He asks, is there any specific walk based on Firosha Kotla Fort? I've heard it has got an interesting history. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about it as well.
Firosha Kotla is a fascinating place because there are many different aspects to it. Of course, it was built by Firosha Tughlaq in the middle of the 14th century. He built it right next to the Yamuna. And it was probably the first really historic city to be built next to the Yamuna in Delhi. And after Firosha Tughlaq's death and the attack of Taimur, it was abandoned. And in fact, a lot of its stones were recycled for building later cities. So it was despoiled in that manner, but it continued to have a sort of a aura of mystery about it, because one of the later Mughal emperors was murdered over here. Then there was some holy men who used to live there. So it had this aura of mystery. And in the 20th century, and quite late, not that early, sometime in the 20th century, this belief developed that there are jinns there. There are these supernatural beings who inhabit Firosha Kotla. And therefore, it led to this tradition of people going there and of holding all sorts of, first of all, propitiating the jinns by offering food to, a lot of food is cooked and people eat it, of course, and they offer it to the animals who are there. So every animal gets to eat over there, whether it's birds or little ants or rodents and animals. So there's a lot of food being spread around over there. A lot of people bring their, they want something. They need, and all kinds of, people want, there's somebody who wants their children to get married, or somebody who wants better marks in their exams. They'll bring their little petitions in little notes and they will offer it over there. So it's a very, very interesting place. Instead, one thing I forgot to mention was that Firosha Kotla is also where Firosha Tughlaq had also brought an Ashokan pillar and put it up. So if you want to look at an Ashokan pillar, again, you can go to Firosha Kotla. So it's an interesting place.
Wonderful. The next question is from Manish Gandhi, and he asks, the Aga Khan tomb, Khane Khana tomb of Akbar's Navratna in Delhi's Nizamuddin area is lagging behind in Delhi's heritage list, despite awareness drives done by various agencies like ASI and ICHR. Why do you think this is?
I would say what has happened is that last few years, a restoration program is going on there. So that of course has its own problems, because if you are doing repair work, restoration work, then access is limited. You can't go in there. So if people can't go in, then obviously it cannot become a big destination. But yes, I agree that not enough people know about Khane Khana's tomb. And in fact, I remember doing a walk once for a lot of kids, school kids, and the bus driver, he said, "Ye to wo Khanna ka tomb hai." So, you know, you know, that was the idea. The idea, nobody knew that this is Rahim. This is Rahim, जिसके दोहे हमने स्कूल में पढ़े हैं. Rahim का ये tomb है. So when you go to Rahim's tomb with the idea, with that in your mind, that this is Rahim's tomb. So I've done walks in the Nizamuddin area where this tomb is, which is focused on the poets of the area. And there are three major poets who are buried in the area. One is Amir Khusro, one is Ghalib, and one is Rahim. And if you go to Rahim's tomb, you stand in the middle of that, and then you recite the dohas of Rahim, and you debate the dohas of Rahim. That is an experience which is very, very different.
Yeah.
So yes, and I hope that once that restoration project is over, there'll be much more focus on that. Yeah. And it's a lovely way of discovering that area through the poets.
Absolutely. There's one question from Anjana, and she asks, you mentioned things are much better now at places like Purana Kila. What else do you think should have been done to preserve the marvelous heritage that we have?
Now, what I'm going to say is a little controversial sometimes. And I feel that we should be focusing a little bit more also on adaptive reuse. A lot of our monuments are the less well-known monuments, which are never going to be huge tourist attractions. They cannot be. I mean, there's a limit to how many foreign tourist or even a domestic tourist may come to Delhi and spend maybe 3 days maximum looking at historic sites. Even Delhi people, I live in Delhi, another person lives in Delhi. Forget about me, I'm a different person that way. But the average person who lives in Delhi may see Qutub Minar once in 5 years. How often will they go to Qutub Minar?
Yeah.
But there are so many less well-known monuments which could attract people if they did a little bit more beyond being a monument. Let us open them up to cultural events. Let's open them up to musical events. Let them even be open for maybe a beautiful dinner, a curated dinner.
Absolutely.
Let us open them up to these things. Let us be very sure that the responsibility has to be taken and accountability as to how they will be treated. Does not mean that it's a free for all. You have to leave all good practices have to be followed. It has to be left in perfect condition. You cannot damage it in any way. Protocols have to be laid down and accountability has to be fixed. But with that, open them up. Let them be used in different ways. Let's enjoy our monuments in many, many different ways. And it's done all over the world. You have cafes in historic buildings. You have so many different things. Here we don't use our monuments well enough. We should. And I think that's one way in which one can be doing more. Though a lot of people will say, oh, you will ruin the monuments. Not if you do it well. If you do it properly, you won't. And there is a lot of scope.
Absolutely. So I have an additional question to this. So since this is something that can be taken from different parts of the world, and this has been in practice for quite some time. It's not a recent event where monuments in different countries have been used for different, cultural events. What do you think holds people back? What do you think holds these specific organizations back when it comes to implementing it?
Let me give you an example of the Archaeological Survey of India. The Archaeological Survey of India is traditionally never been under pressure to earn a revenue from monuments. Because what they get for spending, their expenditure is not linked to their income at all. A lot of people don't realize this. It is our ticket money goes into a central fund. Whatever they will earn from a monument goes into a central fund. The allocation for the upkeep of monuments does not come directly from ticket sales. It will come from a central fund, from an allocation. So when these monuments start getting managed a little bit more professionally, and when you start managing professionally, you start looking at revenue. You see revenue, increasing revenue. What is ASI's or any other archaeological department's incentive to have more people, to have more events, to have more revenue? They don't have any incentive because they will get their allocation irrespective of this. They're not profit motivated, and there has to be some amount of profit motivation.
Absolutely.
And as I'm saying, it has to be, you have to strike a balance. You cannot let the monument just be misused.
Absolutely.
But you have to use it sensibly, but let's bring a professional management
to it. Yeah, that is so true. I mean, at the end of it, when you see a lot of ASI monuments, I have visited a few where they don't actually collect any fees at all. And the upkeep also is quite on the downside, unfortunately. But yeah, this would be a good way to sort of get the push and get that profit motivation in place so that people would actually start looking at the monuments in a different way. Great. Okay, so there's one question from Sujoy, and he says he wants to hear about, he was expecting to hear about the making of Connaught Place directly from you. Maybe you could tell us the favorite part of the book writing that you did, or what was it that inspired you to do it?
You know, the book is a little bit, the name Connaught Place, of course, was because the hook was Connaught Place. It's a part of a series of books, not just here, but it goes from Tamil in Nepal, in Kathmandu, to Darjeeling. You know, it's a long series of books that is being written. So therefore, the Connaught Place was that particular anchor as a landmark. But it's about the making of New Delhi as well. The British capital of New Delhi. It was a great. I loved writing that book because the research was so interesting, and one of the I mean, there are many tidbits out of this, but one of the things that I realized was that, you know, very often people call it Lutyens' Delhi. Now that's a huge misnomer, because all the Lutyens' own suggestions for the town plan were actually rejected by the town planning committee finally. You know what he suggested? He suggested, first of all, that the main road, the Rajpath, which we see today, which goes from Raisina Hill to Purana Killa, that it should go to Java Masjid instead. That was one of his suggestions. And the other suggestion was that instead of putting it on Raisina Hill, Government House, Rashtrapati Bhavan, should actually be in Malcha, which is on the other side of Raisina Hill, you know, at the base of the ridge. The other thing he said was he wanted a grid plan, you know, just right-angled roads, which of course was also not taken up. Also, most of the bungalows in the so-called Lutyens bungalow zone were not designed by Lutyens. He actually designed only 4 bungalows, and they are all in the Rashtrapati Bhavan President's Estate. So Lutyens' name being associated with the city as such is a huge misnomer. So that was one of the things I found. One of the things which I'm not going to tell you, because I think that's a spoiler, is how Pandara Road got its name. But I will encourage you to read the book. I can't give this away because a lot of people are going to read the book, will say, but Ari, it's a spoiler, hame pehle hi pata chal gaya.
You sparked our interest. I'm sure a lot of us are going to go and get that copy now. How wonderful. But this is really an eye-opener about Lutyens, especially. Like, for so many years we've been talking about it, and then to really realize it's not. It's quite interesting. Thank you for that. So here's another question, Swapna. From your eye, this is a question by Syed Junaid. He asks, from your eyes, which city is rich in history, culture, and architecture, if we were to compare Delhi and Calcutta?
They are very different. Delhi has a longer history. Calcutta was, of course, preeminently a British city. It was a British city. Calcutta was established as a city by the British. So it has a particular era of particularly the East India Company, and a little later, It is very, very rich in that history. It also has a huge intangible aspect to it, the food, the cosmopolitanism, all of that. So they are very different in their whole um, uh, approach, I guess. It's a very different experiences, and I'm familiar with both these cities, and I would say that they are different experiences. You need to experience all of them, and therefore I feel really from every city we underestimate how rich most cities are. And as I'm used to seeing even beauty in small houses and down small streets, and in every little street corner, the kind of street food that is available. So you can go and make a exploration in any place you like, and it's absolutely fabulous. So yeah, I find it very difficult to pick
between the two. Interesting. Okay, here's another question, Swapna. So, Swapna, this is from Benny, and he asks if it would be pertinent for people immersed in history to have 2 days of sightseeing, one for old and one for New Delhi. What is the importance of Delhi Gate and the Tughlaqabad Fort in the annals of Indian history?
Anybody studying, you'd be surprised to know when I was doing my BA, and I was in North Campus. I was in a college North Campus. I was in St. Stephen's, and our teachers were really good. But at that time, this whole business of actually exploring sites was not really there. And all the while that I was studying history in the North Campus, I never went to the Ridge to see any of the monuments. That's amazing today. I just didn't see them because nobody mentioned it. So yes, there's a lot more awareness about it. I think particularly for school students, what can be done is that they do go to monuments, but I think it can be made more meaningful for them, that visit. Because when I go to monuments, I often see school kids are brought there, and the average school, I'm not talking about the more aware ones, but often it's like a random outing.
Yes.
They're brought there, they run around, they picnic on the grounds if they are allowed to, and then they go back home without having had any meaningful understanding of the monument.
Yeah.
So that I think I had experience. It's quality over quantity. I think they're going, but how to make it more meaningful for them. So that I think is the challenge. As far as you were looking at Delhi Gate, the Delhi Gate of the city, I guess, there are 2 Delhi gates in Shaajanabad. One is the south-facing gate of the fort, of the Red Fort itself. And the other is the area that we call Delhi Gate, which is also named after a south-facing gate of the city of Shaajanabad. Now, both these gates are named Delhi Gate because they also have alternate names. They were also known as Akbarabadi Darwaza, or the Akbarabadi Gate. Akbarabad is another name for Agra. And they face south, and that south road, what you call Mathura Road, eventually gets to Agra. So therefore it was called the Akbarabad Darwaza, but also Delhi Gate because all the older cities of Delhi were on the south. So when Shaajanabad was built, it was called Shaajanabad, and Delhi was what was earlier. The earlier part was Delhi. So therefore they are called Delhi Gate. So I guess I hope that answers your question. Tughlaqabad, of course, has a huge significance in Indian history. It was built by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq at a period where Delhi was really had been battered in the recent past by several Mongol invasions. The Mongols destroyed a lot, or devastated large parts of Central and West Asia, and they came right up to Delhi as well. And therefore, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, before he became emperor, was a military commander in Multan, and he had to fight with the Mongols many, many times. And therefore, he was very security minded. So he decided to build this absolutely enormous, fortified, strong fort. If you look at Tughlaqabad, I mean, you would see how imposing it is. So he built this huge fort with a large water barrier also. In fact, the southern part was a huge sheet of water originally, which we don't see now because that's all dried up. But it was very, very well fortified. So that was the whole behind that. But it also is associated with Nizamuddin Aulia, because Nizamuddin Aulia used to Um, he had the Sufi saints often, in a sense, the emperors were jealous of their influence, of how much popular support that the Sufis had. And Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq and Nizamuddin Auliya never really got along well with each other, and for various reasons. And one of the things that is said is that while the fort was being built, Nizamuddin Auliya was building a Bauli also. And when the emperor decided to requisition all people to that they mustn't work on any other construction project, must come to the fort only, Nizamuddin Auliya didn't like it. He asked, and people continued to go to Nizamuddin Auliya's Bauli as well because they respected him so much. And it is said that Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq then said that when I come back to Delhi, I will take care, I will deal with this guy, this man, he thinks he can defy me. And it is said that when people told Nizamuddin Auliya that, this is what the emperor has said and you should probably leave the city or something. And he said, Delhi dur ast, which means Dilli dur hai. And Dilli dur hai, meaning that Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was at that time out on an expedition, on a military expedition that, he's not in Delhi yet. So let him come, then we'll see. And of course, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq never came to Delhi because he died in an accident just outside Delhi. Mm-hmm. So it became a prophetic saying, and it is even now used as a proverb, which means that there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. He also cursed the fort. He said, Ya base Gujar, ya rahe Ujjad, which means it will either be occupied by Gujars or it will be a wilderness. And if you look at it, very soon afterwards, it was abandoned. It remained a wilderness. It just had a small village in it. So many, many stories and histories tied up with Tughlaqabad Fort. You're quite right about that.
How wonderful. Okay, I'm going to take the last question now. And this is from Pratik, and he asks, what is the major difference between doing a normal city tour or visiting the monuments with as a regular city tour, and instead of that doing like a heritage tour, a walking tour that, would be led by someone like you? What do you think is the major differentiator between the two?
I think what happens is that this is a more micro look at a place in greater detail. First of all, one is the aspect of going off the beaten track a bit, because Meroli Archaeological Park is going beyond Qutub Minar, which is on a regular tourist's look. And I would also suggest that one of the things that I find very rewarding through, and as a walk leader, I'm saying this, I find very rewarding when doing heritage walks also, is because you are in a group of like-minded people, and particularly exploring a city with a group of people, many of whom are actually resident in that very city, gives you a very, very different look into the city. Because what we do is when we lead the heritage walk, many of our participants are people who are already interested in history, who know something about it. So there's a discussion that is happening. There's a learning experience that is happening for everybody. It's not a one-way street. I'm learning more. I'm teaching, of course. I'm talking about a site, but I'm learning a lot also. It's a great way of interacting with locals also. If I'm looking at it from a point of view of a tourist, if you join one of these heritage walks, you are interacting with locals too. We often end up, somebody suggests, let's go and have a cup of tea somewhere, or if you want suggestions during the course of the walk, a lot of people at the end of the walk, particularly Shaajanabad, will say, where can we go and eat now? So I can give them suggestions about that. So this becomes a way of discovering a city which is very, very different from what a regular tourist itinerary yields to you. You get to know people, and you get to know these back lanes, which you don't often do.
That is absolutely true, I would say. I think it's a very, very different way of looking at the city when you're doing it with a specific kind of people. Although I said one last question, there is one question that has just come up, and if you don't mind, if it's all right with you. Okay. This is a question from Himanshu, and he asks, could you please throw some light on the original natives of Delhi and how they've changed over the centuries?
That's a very good question, actually.
Yes, it is.
Original natives of Delhi, Delhi has had human habitation for a long, long time. So even 100,000 years ago, pre-humans, prehistoric
Yeah.
humans and have been living in this area, mostly lived in on the ridge. And we've had sites which show us that even in the, as I said, the Stone Age, but also in the late Harappan age, people have lived in Delhi. And in the historic period, it has been believed that, and people, you have seen evidence of habitation in Delhi for a long time. You know what is specific about cities, and specifically cities like Delhi? Delhi was on an important trade and pilgrimage route. Delhi has been the capital of important kingdoms, of large empires. And what is a characteristic of cities like this is that people come from far and near and settle in it. It's not only a phenomenon of our times, that many of us have been born somewhere else, have come here to study, who have come here to work, and have made it our home. And not only made it our home, we have brought our own customs, we have brought our own foods, and it has become the food and the customs and the dress of Delhi. So Delhi culture, there are many, many cultures in Delhi. So some are old, some are new. The caste culture is an old one. The Mughal culture is an old one. But there are so many. I mean, today, would anybody have even imagined 50 years ago that momos would be such an important part of the street food culture of Delhi? But it is.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how things keep changing. New festivals, new traditions. So what is specific about Delhi is it's just such a great amalgam of so many different communities, so many different traditions. So when you say who is a Delhi wala,
You never know.
they're all Delhi wala. So, I always give this example of the famous poet Mirza Ghalib. He is seen as a typical Delhi wala. He was born in Agra. He was born in Agra. He lived in Agra till he was about 13 years old. And then he came to Delhi because he married a Delhi girl and moved to Delhi. And he was given this nickname, which he used to hate actually. He was called Mirza Nosha. Nosha means bridegroom, because he was the damad of the city, right? So he was seen as the damad of the city. He wasn't born in Delhi, but he became a Delhi wala. He's seen as the essential Delhi wala. You don't have to be born in Delhi. You don't get any superiority by being born in Delhi. Everybody is a Delhi. Everybody can own this city, and that's what's great about it. I wasn't born here. I moved here when I was 18 years old. So
that's a great punchline to go back with. Really, yeah.
Belongs to whoever wants to make it theirs.
The city, yeah, absolutely. I think that holds so true of Delhi. Even when you come now, you see so many cultures being a part of it. It's really like you said, it's a amalgam of so many things and so many cultures, and it's just a very great. It's a very good starting point for anyone who's traveling to India for the first time to really get the feel of India as a whole. Thank you, Swapna. I'm gonna leave you with just I have one last question for you, which is rather than a question, actually, it's just what is the one thing that you remember from any of the walks that you've done so far? This one incident that has really it stayed with you. Any such incident?
I have to tell you this story. It's not of me leading a walk, but my being on a walk. It was not even in India. It was in this very historic town in England, Exeter. And Exeter has a beautiful cathedral, and I was on a ghost walk in the evening, and this middle-aged lady was leading this walk, and I was like, I was identifying with her. I was saying that this is somebody, it could be me, right? And she's doing this walk, and it's a ghost walk, and she leads us into this space, and it's a restaurant. It's a functioning restaurant in a courtyard. And she goes in there and she says, this is believed to be haunted, and there's a poltergeist over here. And the poltergeist's name is Ethel. But we don't call its name because it's a man, and Ethel, i.e. Ethel, is a woman's name. So we don't call its name. So there were these other members participants in this walk who loudly started calling out Ethel, right? Okay. And this lady who was leading the walk felt, was like, she was she was visibly looking a little angry that they were saying this, and she quickly led us out of there. She went into the next place, and she started kind of stumbling over her words, right? You know, what she was supposed to say next and all that. And I was like standing right there. I said, why don't you look at your notes? Because she had some notes in her little notebook. She started looking at it, but she became more and more agitated. And eventually she said, I don't remember where I am, where I've parked. She had completely lost her memory.
Oh my God.
Our hotel was very close. So we actually took her to our hotel. We looked through her bag, found her cell phone, called her partner who came and collected her. She had suffered attack of what they say, transient global amnesia. She had lost her memory completely without any physical, because then later we asked her partner, we are leaving tomorrow, but please let us know if she's okay. They said we did a CAT scan and all that, she was fine. Mm-hmm. So she had completely, I think so my children who were teenagers at that point said, this is the poltergeist work. So I said, yeah, I think she was upset about it. She believed it, and therefore she was upset about it, and that probably caused the trauma. So, you know, it's like, it's one of those absolutely unbelievable stories.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's been such a hoot having you with us. I mean, such a great insight into Delhi. And I'm sure like a lot of us will be coming into Delhi and doing the walk with you specifically if we get the chance to. If not with Intact, definitely. But it's been such a great pleasure having you. And thank you so much for doing this for us. I would now announce the webinar closed, and I thank everyone for participating in it. Please don't forget to fill in the polls. It helps us do better. Thanks again, Swapna, for taking time out to doing this for us.
Thank you so much.